I have two genres of manga that are hit or miss. When they hit hard. And when they miss really, really, really hard. The first one is romance. I love romance like Fruits Basket, despise stuff like Kanojo mo Kanojo. I loved You Were Experience I Was Not, but I hate domestic girlfriend. And the other genre that is hit or miss is psychological horror. Sometimes we get really amazing stuff. Sometimes we get stuff that's kind of mid, but not bad, like Happy Sugar Life. And sometimes... Usually these terms are squashed together, right? Psychological horror. It's rare to find horror that isn't psychological. And making something psychological is quite tough without it having horror aspects. Hold on to that thought. My favorite mangaka is Shiori Amase. I hope to talk to her at some point in my life. She's created multiple comics that are critically underrated, my all-time favorite being Koko wa Imakara Rinri desu, localized as We Shall Now Begin Ethics. It's about Takayanaga sensei, a high school teacher who teaches an ethics class to most of the delinquents who feel like his class should be an easy A. And in some ways, I guess the class is an easy A. The classwork isn't what's really difficult about this class. We stay with Takiyanagi as one group after another graduates, but the stories of his students really tend to stick with us. A thought daughter with insecurities, a self-harming girl, a gender-fluid student, a guy who literally walks in front of a car because he feels like his life is too boring, and another guy who is suffering from some pretty severe school avoidance. We see most of the stories from the kids' perspectives, and Takiyanagi makes an appearance to give them advice or step up where other adults in their lives have failed. He's probably my favorite protagonist of all time, and I'll probably make another video about this series in particular. My point in bringing the series up is that this is a psychological story without the horror. Shiori Amase wrote Koko wa Imakara Renri desu after her aunt had taken her own life, and Shiori struggled to understand why or how anybody could do that. This inner exploration was the start of the creation of these characters. Shiori Amase does this. She writes her characters off of conditions. Not mental conditions, but more so human conditions. Situations. She starts with a fact about that person. Let's stay in this We Shall Now Begin Ethics branch for this explanation. A young boy whose older brother is in the mafia, and whose parents are largely absent. Those are facts about a character. Assuming this boy is generally average, what kind of mental toll does that situation take on a person? Well, the average person is going to see anti-drug or anti-mafia opinions in their life at some point, right? So they're aware that what their older brother is doing is wrong. But without his parents being present, he might develop bad study habits or try not very hard in school. This creates academic insecurity, and now we have a clear reason for why this person might also start dabbling in his brother's business. You see what she did? She started with the condition, and from there, she puts herself in the shoes of that person to deduce what their perception of the world and themselves would be like. This fantastic way of doing this creates really, really authentic characters with a clearly explainable outlook on the world, and we can easily relate to them. Most manga start with a list of traits prescribed to a character, and then puts those characters in different scenarios. Shiori Amase writes it backwards. She looks at the scenario first. She also wrote a one-shot, the one-shot that's in this video's thumbnail, and the one that I really want to talk about today. It takes place in Brazil. Did you know that there's a really large population of Brazilian Japanese people? I learned this recently in one of my classes. Shout out to Mr. Kojima in my multiculturalism class. Not that he'll ever see this. That's unrelated, just a little factoid. The title of this comic is Kami no Caveira. Kami means God, no is the possessive article, and Caveira isn't Japanese. If you're Brazilian or speak Portuguese, you'll know that this word means skull. God's skull is the rough title of this comic. Tobias is our protagonist, and he begins with telling us about his eyes. He knows that at one point in his life, his childhood, his eyes were beautiful. Perhaps very light-colored, green or blue. The Jesus statue signals to us that we are in Rio de Janeiro, and Tobias narrates that as he's watched over by the body of Christ, he wanted to make a world that Jesus left behind more beautiful. I'm not Christian, but that's generally a good thought, right? Shiori Amase takes a trick out of Junji Ito's playbook. If you've watched any video about Junji Ito, they always talk about the page turn. And it's a real and genuine trick that mangakas use to really shock you when you're reading their comics. But in Kami no Caveira, Shiori Amase uses this because after you turn the page with Jesus watching over you, you're met with police brutality. In the city you'd think would be the closest to Christ, literally being watched over him by the statue, some really disgusting things are happening here. And it's not just the gangs doing it. The police are questioning this man about the whereabouts of his gang leaders. When he tells them he genuinely has no idea, they wave another officer over in a car to slowly start driving over his legs. This is a form of interrogation that they're using. Tobias narrates to us about the city of Rio, where there are narcotics gangs that are making living there a complete hell. As he's doing this, the person being tortured shouts, "Aren't you guys cops?" Tobias, in his mind, corrects him. They aren't cops per se, but the BOPE. Sort of like the SWAT team in the USA, except the BOPE are called to settle disputes between gangs, and they're supposed to protect civilians. After they get nothing out of running over this guy's legs, we cut to the members of the BOPE sitting in a cafeteria. Tobias is quiet, while the rest of the BOPE are chatting amongst themselves. They're talking about a woman who keeps approaching the BOPE constantly about her son, who she believes was involved in a shootout. The BOPE are super blasé about the whole situation, assuming not only that this boy must have been a member of the gang and involved in drugs, but also assuming that it's the mother's parenting and her fault that her son died in the shootout in the first place. No responsibility goes toward the BOPE who cleans up after the shootouts, or who's supposed to de-escalate the situation. It's always the victim's fault, who in this case may or may not have even been in the gang in the first place, and his grieving mother's fault for having a son who may or may not have been in a gang. And that is enough for these men to feel no remorse and no empathy towards the woman who lost her son or the son who lost his life in a shootout. They go even further to insult the mother, saying that it's not just the boy who is at fault, but the mother. If the mother wasn't dumb and had gotten a proper education and hadn't raised such a dumb boy, maybe the boy would still be alive. Here's a quote. "That's why no matter what you say to them about the law, it just ain't gonna get through. Never mind the fact that to our knowledge and to their knowledge, none of these two victims, the mother or the son, had committed any crime at all." Their mental gymnastics went from he's probably a criminal to if his mother didn't want him to die brutally in a shootout, she should have gotten a better education. Since when is it the mother's fault? What insane logic from these BOPE officers. They go on, here's another quote. "It makes me sick. There ain't ever gonna be an end to this unless all gangs are purged." Which is a harrowing call of violence in its own right, but unfortunately a belief held by many people. If you have drugs, it's your own fault you die. If you're walking around in the hood, it's your own fault if you die in a shootout. If you steal something, it's your own fault if you're shot by the store owner. If you're beaten by your partner, it's your own fault for staying with an abusive person. This sort of victim blaming infects the police force, probably throughout the world, and it comes from a place of arrogance and narcissism. The sort of person who believes these things also believes themselves to be different. If I were in that scenario, you'd never catch me walking in the hood, stealing from a shelf, or with an abusive partner. I'd be smarter than those dumb idiots who do such a thing. They should know better. Which is why it's so much easier to put the blame on a group of people you perceive to be dumb or lesser than yourself. Even this early in the story, it's clear that the BOPE perceive themselves as much higher and better than the gang members they're meant to quell. And that's giving them the mental justification to torture and abuse not only them, but to write off their family members as well. I can't help but think of Abu Ghraib, where the American prison guards posed in disgusting holiday photo shoots with prisoners that they were torturing. Back to the comic, Tobias tells us that he always believed in justice personally. He tells us that he wanted to get rid of or erase things that weren't proper in the world, to make the world a better place. Before his mind wanders too much, his captain bursts in and tells him, along with two other men, that they have to move out now to stop some gang violence. On the way, the captain explains that a civilian had already died between the dispute. One of the men urges the rest, "We have to break into the building now and stop them. After all, more citizens could be getting killed or injured inside the building." The captain, though, demands that they stop and wait, because their only orders were to quell the dispute, not to rescue civilians. This part is really interesting to me because you'll never hear an actual police officer say something like that, because it's almost comically evil. It's not our job to save innocent people is an insane thing to admit, but Shiori Amase has him say the quiet part pretty much out loud. This is how police will often operate, even if they won't admit it to themselves. There's nothing more important than the lives of a fellow officer. Even if you can save a civilian, if your life is in danger, don't sweat it. That's not part of your job. Your job is to quell the dispute. If you think I'm reaching and just trying to put a bad name on police officers, just wait and see how the rest of the situation plays out. They spot some gang members roughing up, killing a civilian. It's pretty unclear what the actual dispute is about because I doubt the police officers care all that much. But rather than doing literally anything else, the captain sneaks behind them and opens fire without saying a single word. One of the people involved in the dispute makes a run for it, and the captain orders his men to light him up with gunfire and to not let him escape. The only way to quell the dispute, in the eyes of the captain, is silencing everybody involved, regardless of who's involved in what, regardless of justice. That ends their job for the night, and as he goes home, Tobias sweats and asks himself, what should I believe to keep going on like this? That night, he wakes up from a nightmare, being shaken by his partner Jadi. He noticed during the dispute that night that a boy about 10 years old was caught up in the gunfire and had lost his life, and it's weighing on his conscience so heavily that he can't sleep. Tobias says that because of a piece of paper held in his hand, he was likely only a message boy for the gangs, a role that probably doesn't deserve to die. According to people who like to victim blame, it must be the boy's fault for getting involved with the gang in the first place, right? Regardless of the fact that he was 10 years old. Perhaps it was his parents' fault even for not getting a proper education. Maybe if they weren't stupid, then their son wouldn't be stupid enough to work with a gang, right? Obviously, I'm being sarcastic. But there's no doubt that that's what the BOPE believes, because they probably feel no remorse for killing him. Tobias lies on his bed and tells Jadi, I've fulfilled the dreams I've had ever since I was young. So why does it hurt so much? He recalls the intensive and horrendous training he had to endure, and he tells us that out of 100 applicants, only he and 3 other men were chosen to join the BOPE. One of the men who entered the force around the same time as him got killed in a gunfire shortly after joining. The BOPE got, quote-unquote, revenge on the city for killing a BOPE officer. It's unclear if those who were killed as revenge were civilians or gang members. I doubt the BOPE cared all that much. At this point, the author wants no doubt in your mind who the bad guys are. It's supposed to be the BOPE. This is the foundation for the rest of the story, as it moves away from police brutality and into an individual psyche and how it plays a role in the proliferation of corrupt organizations. From here on, we aren't going to be focused on the BOPE as a whole. We're going to be focused on 2 characters, Tobias and his captain, Shindo. Tobias crawls into Jadi's lap as she snuggles him. He thinks to himself that the officers in the BOPE don't concern themselves with human things like children and the defenseless, and they only want to carry out orders given to them by their superiors. He mutters to Jadi that he can't bring himself to like Shindo, the captain, no matter how hard he tries to. He says that his methodologies are just brutal and gross, and they barely differ from what the wild gangs do to each other. He actually gets a little racist here, which I think is supposed to be a palate cleanser away from all the sadness. He says that Shindo, who is a Japanese man, is quote-unquote nothing like his race is supposed to be, with the stereotype being that the Japanese are polite and Shindo is kind of like a wild cannon. Jadi tells Tobias that it's not good to discriminate, and that there's gotta be something that his quote-unquote beautiful eyes haven't seen yet about Shindo. She's encouraging here to keep his mind open about his captain, because maybe he'll see Shindo in a different light. Don't forget, guys, Jadi has absolutely no idea what she's talking about here. Shindo is the same guy who opened fire on random people because a BOPE officer got killed. Please, please, please keep Shindo's actions in mind. This manga from here on out is going to get psychological and it's going to try to trick you. That's intentional. Just remember what Shindo has done, okay? Tobias and a few other guys from the BOPE walk by a gym room a while later, and they see Shindo alone, resting between workouts. The other guys say that Shindo only lives for battle and prepares for it even in his downtime by exercising. Tobias is scared by the look on Shindo's face in that moment, and resolves to never become a mindless killing machine like him. Well, their next mission is given. It's kind of like a standoff. As they crouch behind stone walls and wait for their signal to enter and quell another gang dispute, Tobias spots a small child. There's no gunshots yet, but that's only because both sides, the gangs and the BOPE, are taking cover before the first shot rings out. He panics and tries to signal silently for the child to hide. It's clear that this is about to be a graveyard, a battle site, and he doesn't want to see the death of another child. The kid darts between the boat base cover and where the gang is stationed, leaving him wide open and available to be shot. Tobias panics and he rushes out of his position to go grab the child and drag it to safety. The rest of the boat bay officers are shouting at him, shocked that he'd do something so risky. Tobias and the child are unharmed, even though they were shot at by the gang a few times. Tobias shouts at the child in his arms, "Are you stupid? Do you have a death wish or something?" But upon closer examination of the child's eyes, he sees that the kid is on some kind of substance. It's then that the child mindlessly holds a gun to Tobias's head. Without missing a beat, Captain Shindo darts to Tobias's rescue and kicks the child away from him, making the kid drop the gun. Shindo is able to scrabble and get the gun before the kid and points it at the child. Tobias begs the captain to not shoot the kid. Meanwhile, their cover has been completely blown. The gangs know full well that the BOPE are here. Shindo tells the kid that he's way too young for a toy like this, and the kid runs away. Shindo hits Tobias with the bottom of the gun and shoves him against a wall, asking Tobias what the hell he joined BOPE for. We get a few badass panels of Shindo picking up a gun, pointing at the oncoming gang members, and dragging Tobias to safety. He throws Tobias into an alleyway. Tobias stares up at him with eyes tearing up, and his mind is just completely frazzled from the fear and pain that he felt from literally almost being killed by a child. I'll just read the next few lines here that Shindo says to Tobias verbatim. "I don't care if you hate me, but don't act on your own. Your allies will die. People that nobody will miss die every single day in this world. That goes for the gangs and the police. That's why you, a part of the BOPE, can't die. You guys who hate evil from the bottom of your hearts. You guys who can face God with pride and have strong, proper wills. You have no reason to die, nor any reason to let yourselves be killed. Go ahead. I'll take care of things here. You need to hurry up and stop your bleeding." Let's pause. Before we continue with Tobias's response, let's analyze what Shindo actually thinks here, because it's really the first time we've heard him talk for more than like a phrase or two. It's clear that Shindo also subscribes to the idea that the members of the BOPE are better than any gang member. They differentiate themselves with the low-life gangster in a few different ways. Firstly, the members of the BOPE hate evil. By reading between the lines, the gangsters are evil. Secondly, members of the BOPE are doing God's work. They're proud and have proper will and morals, as opposed to the gang members who don't. Therefore, their number one priority should be self-protection. Don't risk your life for anybody or anyone, because you are already the best, the creme de la creme. You're important. Why would you trade yourself for someone else if you're already one of the elites, one of the only people we can count on? Shindo sees himself, as well as the other BOPE, as the elites. They are perfect. They are pure, at least as close to it as you could get in this city. They are the only people who have good morals in this city. After all, they're here to protect, right? Shindo literally doesn't see the gangsters as people capable of proper morals. He doesn't see them as human beings, and he's pushing that ideology onto Tobias in this moment, right after he almost got killed. So let's continue and see Tobias's response. "But Captain, you can't handle that many of them alone." Shindo responds, "Unlike you, I can die anytime." Tobias asks why, and he responds, "My heart hates evil just like you guys, but I've killed a few too many people. In reality, I'm a demon who ought to go to hell right away." So let's pause again. Shindo obviously knows he's done something wrong. He's killed innocent people. He isn't delusional about what he's done, but instead of blaming the BOPE, the system that he's a part of, he takes his failures personally. The innocent people he's killed, he takes it personally. He's a demon, the BOPE is not. He deserves to die, but his allies who do the exact same thing, they're prideful, perfect. They're people who deserve the right to live. It's mental gymnastics. He has this disgusting fake realization about the wrongs he's done, because it's fake. That's how toxic systems continue. You internalize the failures and share the wins. Every good the BOPE does goes to the reputation of the BOPE. Any accidental murders of 10-year-old boys, that falls only on that officer's mental load and nothing else. After the mission is completed, Shindo tells Tobias that he'll stay quiet about him disobeying orders today if he decides he wants to stay in the BOPE. Tobias says that he'll stay. He tells Shindo that he thought he was some heartless killing machine up until now. In this moment of being frazzled and unsure about his future, and faced on a scary crossroad, with newfound respect for his captain, Tobias relents and shares one thing that's been on his mind. He asks Shindo, "Do you think what I'm doing is the proper thing?" Shindo grumbles and responds, "What are you talking about?" "Of course it is." And we get this close-up of Tobias's once beautiful eyes, now filled with tears. He thinks to himself, "Those simple words were all I've wanted to hear this whole time." We get a few more words, but the comic ends with Tobias saying that while his days in the BOPE are the same as they've ever been, stained with violence, he feels hope that his actions, alongside his allies, will eventually change the city of Rio for the better. And that's how the comic ends. Does that feel good to you? Does that feel like a warm ending? Because to me, this ending is the most tragic I've read in a really, really long time. Tobias had an internal conflict, right? He didn't like how the BOPE were carrying out their orders or how they were trying to reform the city with more violence. And yet, all it took was one person he respected, his captain, after he saves his life, to confirm that what he's doing is the right thing. After one person confirms that, he can mental gymnastics his way into mental stability. That's the thing. It's not rationality, but it is stability. There's no way in hell that the BOPE continuing in the manner it is going to ever improve the city of Rio. Like he said, it's the same bit of stained with violence as it's always been. But Tobias's mental health is stable now with the reassurance of his allies. It's not facts that he needs. He needs to feel internally sound. The entire story is the death of Tobias's beautiful eyes, because by the end, he's the same as Shindo. There's this little blip at the end, likely written by Amase herself in the last panel of the comic. No character says this, it's just kind of written there. It says, "Only if you love the city can you change it." Do you think that Shindo loves the city of Rio? Or does he hate it? What about LAPD, Los Angeles police officers, or NYPD, New York City police? Do you think they love the city they live in? Do you think the LAPD looks at Skid Row and loves it? Do you think they see potential? This is why I told you not to let Shindo's self-deprecating speech monologue make you think he's redeemable, because he isn't. He doesn't change at all throughout the story. We just get an inside peek into how he rationalizes the literal torture he inflicts on civilians daily. Because that's what he does. He's a torturer. He drives over people's legs with a car, bro. And now Tobias is going to do the same. And eventually, when Shindo dies in the line of fire, because that's all that is going to eventually happen to him, Tobias is going to replace him as captain, and the same cycle is going to repeat over and over. But now the faces of dead children are no longer haunting Tobias's dreams. Just because they don't haunt his dreams doesn't mean that they don't still die, though. Kids are still dying. It's the same violence as ever. I think this story by Shiori Amase is meant to be a tragedy. Amase has written about conflict in both Kami no Caveira and another comic that I'm trying to find and finish reading. It's called The Ruins and the Fire That Binds Us, but I can't find it anywhere. She's rising to popular status after We Shall Now Begin Ethics got its own J-drama, and her first ever popular series, All Out, got an anime adaptation. I'm hoping that her stuff gets more and more popular because I really love analyzing her stories. This is psychological without the horror aspect, but it's almost more scary. It's a critique. I really enjoy it. Let me know if you have any more recommendations or comics. Visit me on Ko-Fi for bloopers and early scripts and stuff like that. Subscribe for more. I'll see you next time.